Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Scares That Shaped Us, a podcast about horror writers and the stories that made them. I'm your host, Matthew Jackson. The intro will be short this week. I'm still in the middle of Fantastic Fest, and I'm tired. The Black Phone 2 is good. VHS Halloween is good. I saw a secret screening of the new Silent Night, Deadly Night. It's very good. I got to hang out with friend of the show, Clay McLeod Chapman, who was in town to premiere his movie. That was amazing. I've had a wonderful time. I am also extremely tired. But the show goes on, and we have a great guest for you this week. Our guest is Becky Spratford. We're going to talk to Becky about her amazing new essay collection, Why I Love Horror, which features some of your favorite horror novelists working today, writing about the genre they love, why they're in it, why they do it. We're also going to have a fascinating conversation with Becky about a book that isn't shelved in the horror section. It's Where the Sidewalk Ends by Shel Silverstein, which is a thing that all of us read in one form or another when we were kids. Probably never thought of it as a horror, as a anything to do with the horror genre, but Becky is here to prove that assumption wrong. We have an amazing discussion of all the different horror concepts that are sort of embedded in these poems and how it kindled Becky's horror fandom, how it kindles a lot of different things in the minds of young readers, why that's important, and so much more. I had a great time talking to Becky about these poems as they relate to the horror genre. I hope you enjoy it as well. Let's head over right now to our interview with Becky Spratford. Joining us this week on The Scares That Shaped Us is one of the most important voices in modern horror right now. She is a librarian. She is an expert in reader's advisory, training librarians all over the world on how to connect the right book to the right reader. She is a columnist for Library Journal, a reviewer for Booklist, and now the editor of the new book, Why I Love Horror, featuring essays by some of your favorite horror authors. It is available September 23rd. Becky Spratford, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Matthew. It's always fun to talk to somebody else who does the work I do.
Yeah, it's we were talking about this before we hit record. Like it's really fun to connect with another horror reviewer who is in the trenches on that stuff. Which you're more prolific than I am. But yeah, it's great to be able. I'm sure we're gonna have a lot of fun talking about all of that. But first, I want to talk about Reader's Advisory, which is a big part of your life and a very important thing for librarians to master and for libraries in general. And you have a really great philosophy about how you start with Reader's Advisory, connecting a book with a reader, that you outline in your essay at the start of Why I Love Horror. So I was wondering, for listeners who don't know, give us kind of a breakdown of what RA is and why it's important and how you approach it.
Thank you so much for asking. And actually, this entire book I'm using not just to showcase horror, but to showcase the work that librarians are doing every day, matching books with readers.
Yeah.
And it will come as no surprise that all of it revolves around that word why. So why someone likes a book and not what happens is the core at why someone would read a book and why someone would like it or not like it. So you might say you like a haunted house story, but there are so many different ways to tell that haunted house story. I know you talked on a previous episode recently with Rachel Harrison about Amityville Horror. That is a different haunted house story than maybe like The Haunting of Hill House, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're completely different spectrums, and somebody could like both, but they probably don't, right? Because why? And when we talk about Reader's Advisory, and I teach Reader's Advisory, I've been a Reader's Advisor since 2000. I worked at a public library for 15 years. I taught the course at the graduate level. It's another thing a lot of people out there don't know. To be a librarian, you need a master's degree in library science. So I have one of those. I taught the course in Reader's Advisory at a university for 8 years. And now I train librarians, like you said, all over the world with a series of trainings I do. And they aren't just about horror. Of course, I use a lot of horror examples, but it's about every reader and every genre. And in those trainings, I work with the library workers to get to their why. I have an entire training where I have them figure out a book they love, and then I take them through a series of leading questions about the pacing, the storyline, the characters, the tone and the mood, the style and the language, all these different appeal areas is what we call them in library speak. But it's really just the adjectives people use to describe books. So like, for example, it's character centered, or it has multiple points of view, or it has a specific setting that I really like. And especially with horror, we're talking about going from something that's chilling to something that's visceral and everything in between. And so I help library workers to connect with themselves as a reader. And then from there, we extrapolate out, and they use that as a way to start conversations with other readers, even if they like something completely different, but use their own experience and the work they've done to find their own why, and then use that to help others and to articulate it.
Yes, it's an art form and a science all rolled into one, and I'm so grateful that there are people out there who still practice it, because especially because in our world, in the book reviewer world and in the book influencer world, so often these things are broken down as a list of tropes. We tend to talk very specifically about, well, this has a forbidden romance in it, and this has a haunted house, this has a wicked stepmother, whatever. Um, and you talk very eloquently in your essay in this book about the importance of why, and you also, the something that I was not expecting that you do in the book is every author, there are 18 authors in this, is that correct?
18. Yep.
18 authors, including big names like Stephen Graham Jones, Paul Tremblay, Haley Piper, Josh Mallerman. Lots of cool people contributed to this. You give each of them a little introduction and tell readers within the text, if you've never read this person's work, start with this. And if you like their work, here's another author you might like. So anyone who gets this book is going to get their own little reader's advisory guide right in the middle of the book. But I want to talk about the essays because you gave everyone a lot of freedom. You gave them basically a word count and the prompt, right about why I love horror. And everything else is like, Paul Tremblay's has illustrations in it. Stephen Graham Jones is broken up into several sections that are about different themes and ideas. What was it like for you as an editor? Because I know you've done this kind of stuff with authors before online, just getting them to write these essays, but getting these things coming in and realizing like, oh, everyone just went crazy. What was it like then corralling them into a book?
So that was part of the fear and the excitement for me, but also what I wanted to give to readers. So yes, as you mentioned, I have done this for almost 10 years already with authors, some of whom have done it for me on the blog and gave me something completely different for the book. But and I actually have some essays coming this October from some of those read-alike authors from the book who didn't make it to the book. So I'm excited to share those. But I've always, because I've done it for so long, and I let authors be authors. So here's the first thing, right? If I'm going to ask them to share why they love horror, I want them to feel the freedom to share it in the way they want to share it. Because as we talk about all the time, horror is an emotion as well as a genre. It is extremely personal to every reader, and every way it's addressed is different. So, and every author has their own style, because I wanted this book to not only showcase why people love horror for those who love it and also those who don't. One of the biggest feedbacks I've gotten is from people who've been early readers, now I'm going to give this to my family so they can understand why I love this genre, right? But it's very personal, and I wanted them to capture their entry into horror, their love of horror, what is it about it, without guardrails. Now, that being said, I did not edit every single one, right? The guardrails are be yourself, maximum of 4,000 words. I wanted to give them more, but my editor, Joe Monti, was like, that book will be too long. And fascinatingly, they came in some just over, the 2,000 was the minimum. Some came over just 2,000, but only 2 went over, and they were not by that many words. And that was John Langan, which is no surprise. We can talk about his essay if you want later. He's adorable, but it was over. And Grady Hendrix, just by a few words as well. and they just were themselves. So as they came in, I honestly didn't read them more than a cursory reading just to see what I had. I wasn't thinking about editing yet as they came in. And then when it was time to put it together, I'm actually looking here to the side. I have a poster on my wall in my office of the cover of the original Haunting of Hill House. And I had turned that into basically a like planning board where I had everyone's names on Post-its and I was moving them around to do the order. And then I would make little notes. And I put them into groups, as you can see in my introductions. And I started to see themes like, you know, when I was really little, when this is a trauma I had, this is a story I want to share. This is a list like Stephen at the end. Stephen's was perfect because it's literally the closing argument for the whole book. It's a list because of why he loves horror. But then I got surprises like Grady, who gave an extremely emotional and personal essay that is shocking. And I'm not going to give it away at all because it is shocking. But here's the thing, and Grady's is a great example. I was touched by how much they all trusted me with some very personal emotions. Grady was constantly coming back and forth to me the whole time. I'm going to write about this. I'm going to write about this. And everything was slightly detached. And I kept just saying, Grady, whatever you want. Grady, whatever you want. And then what he turned in, he wrote about his father, which he has never done in public before. And I know Grady. I've known Grady for years. I know how hard that was for him. But the trust everyone had in me to share some very personal, I mean, Victor Laval's essay is basically how horror saved his life.
Yeah.
And you know, and some of them have more humor but they all really touch a nerve. And so as I got them, I tried to help make them stronger. So like Alma Katsu got political because that's her background, right? She worked for the NSA. And I was like, all right, at the end, I need you to go harder. She's like, are you sure? I'm like, Alma, I am sure. You know, like I needed to be stronger. And like Tananarive Due, that was hard. I had to edit Tananarive Due. It was like a legend. I had to have her rework a couple areas that I felt like she was holding back as well. Most of it was holding back. Although, and Josh Mallerman says I can do this, I saved his butt because he made a huge geographical error in the beginning of his. I'm like, my dude, that is not what Chicago looks like as you're on a train from Michigan. You're going the wrong way. He's like, oh my gosh, thank you. So yeah, it was a lot.
So you mentioned Josh.
Yeah.
I think every essay in this is wonderful and everyone should read them all. But Josh's in particular was a favorite of mine because Josh's essay is essentially a transcription of a debate he had with someone on a train who saw him reading a Robert Bloch paperback and basically began to needle him as like, you know, don't you want a bigger challenge with your mind than Psycho 2 or you know. And that's a conversation when Josh was on the show that we had a little bit about the importance of opting in to horror. You have to you have to give yourself permission to feel these things that are happening in these stories, no matter how crazy the stories are. And that in itself is an intellectual and emotional reward. And I know I get the question all the time of, you know, why is this a thing you like, and how could you watch that stuff? How could you read that stuff? Why is that such? You seem so nice in person. Why are you this way? And I'm curious because I'm sure you've had those same conversations many times. If you what you came away from having done this book, what's some new ammo that you feel like you got from this book that you didn't have before?
Oh my gosh, I've had that happen so many times. And especially when I'm interacting with people, either who only know me personally or who I meet who are book people. I actually wrote about an interaction on a plane on my way to StokerCon in Providence in the afterword of an academic horror book that I did the afterword for. And I was talking to this woman next to me. She was doing a book for her book club. And I looked over, I'm like, oh, you're reading that book. You know, what do you think of it? I'm a librarian. I'm doing that with my book club in a few weeks. And then we kept talking. She's like, well, and then we were done. And it was like, you know, a fairly literary nonfiction book. And then when we were done, she's like, and what's bringing you to Providence? And so I told her StokerCon, and she went, what? Like, it was a dirty word. And so I get this all the time. What did I learn is I learned it was important to share and come out there and say, hey, I'm a legitimate librarian. My work is in textbooks for librarians. I
Yes.
taught the graduate school in libraries. People pay me to teach them at their libraries. And my specialty is horror, right? I have 3 textbooks for librarians from ALA editions, which I wrote before this. This is not my first rodeo, right? And those books were all about justifying why horror belonged in libraries and helping those readers. So helping library workers to help those readers. My favorite line, and they made me limit myself to only 3 repeats of it in the 3rd edition. I had it in 6 times. Your horror readers are not monsters. They just like to read about them. And I talk about this all the time. So I saw this book as my chance to get out there to the rest of the world and to give people that, like you said, ammo, right? To give them those arguments, those who love horror, to give them those arguments to help explain themselves to other people. I mean, look, Stephen Graham Jones, Paul Tremblay, now Brian Keene, just a few that were on the bestseller list, the New York Times, in their first week of sales, Grady Hendrix, this year. These are not people who are selling niche titles.
Yeah.
And people need to know that. Rachel Harrison, I mean, she's a huge bestseller. These books are out there. So I'm giving the arguments to people who love it. But what I'm also doing is all those snobs who think that they don't read horror. And let me just say, Barack Obama read The Buffalo Hunter this year. And it's literally the best book that came out this year in any genre. And I am standing by that. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. When we're recording this, they're announcing the National Book Award finalists. But I called my contact at the National Book Award when that book came out. And I said, you better get this into the jury's hands. That's how strongly I feel about this book.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is not a book that like is out there, some niche world, right? So this is a chance for those people who secretly want to try it and have talked it down, but realize that, oh, everyone's talking about it. And this is a way for them to have a chance to enter that conversation and find their own way. You talked about the essays I wrote at the beginning. That was a non-starter. Like I told Joe I was going to do that. He's like, oh, I expected that. I'm helping you. I'm holding your hand and taking you through the genre, but letting the authors tell you why.
And for any, like, I don't know why you'd be listening to this podcast if you're not already into horror a little bit, but just in case you're here because Becky's here and you want to learn some stuff. I have not met every author that is in this book, but every author that I have met that is in this book is a completely lovely person.
Okay, so that was a requirement to me, and that is one of the reasons why I was the right person to do this book, because I know these people.
Yeah.
I've met them all. I've worked with them for years. A lot of them have been some of my summer scares authors. So I've sent them out into the world for representing the Horror Writers Association book list, Book Riot, and all these other places in this reading a summer reading program that I've done for years. I've trusted them to go out there and be good and speak well for libraries. I needed to know that I could trust the people that were in this. And there are people I didn't know well enough who I couldn't ask. There were others like Sylvia Moreno Garcia, who I asked to be in the book. And at the time she was like, I am too busy, but best of luck.
Yeah.
And then she gave me a blurb for the book, which apparently I found out she doesn't do often. I'm greatly appreciative of it because she's someone I've worked with for summer scares. She's an author I respect. But every single one of these people is a good person. And that was a requirement for me because I'm not having my name associated with people who I don't like as humans.
Yeah.
And 2, I don't want to give out people. I don't want to tell other people to read people who are, not good humans.
So you mentioned the Buffalo Hunter, which is a masterpiece. Like I wrote something about it for Dread Central. It's out there, and you've certainly written about it. I want to ask just selfishly before we get into the topic, like what are the other books this year that have really hit for you in the horror space?
Yeah, I think that I've been talking about that with people. When the Wolf Comes Home, I think was
Yeah.
Nat Cassidy's best book yet. And it goes places. Like I had to read the ending twice. I was like, did you just do that? Um, that is awesome. That was great. I really, really liked Haley Piper's A Game in Yellow. I thought it takes there's so many books that do a take on the King in Yellow and have done it for years. I feel like this one brings it into the 21st century reader, whether you've read that or not. And again, I am very big stickler for endings. That also has a terrifying ending that I absolutely loved. And there is a book that just surprised me, a book I knew nothing about, a book that I only found on my own and asked to review, but it's Under the Country of Heaven. And I have to look up the author, but by Frederick Durbin. And it is a weird Western. It was not really marketed as horror. Um, that book blew me away. But then there's books I read that were like super. Well, wait, I also want to talk about the Eric LaRocca books this year have been great. And I'm really excited to follow the entire Burnt Sparrow trilogy.
Oh
Again,
yeah.
great ending in We Are Always Tender with Our Dead. But here's a fun one that I've been telling a lot of people to read. And I think it's the book I'm saying to everyone is the book you can give to people who don't like horror, who think they don't like horror, but they will love. And it's the Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre by Philip Fracassi. And here's why. It is the Thursday Murder Club, but make it a slasher.
Yeah.
And the Thursday Murder Club I also love and is so popular right now. And then finally, I think the book that I also loved this year that I'm not sure is going to only fall in horror spaces is Angel Down by Daniel Kraus.
Angel Down is brilliant. I had lunch with we were just talking about Eric LaRocca. I had lunch with Eric today. He was in Austin. We were talking about Angel Down and how absolutely brilliant that book is. Yeah, all I have not read Under the Country of Heaven. I will have to go seek that out now. I love how many weird westerns and horror westerns we're getting right now. There's so many that have started to pop up everywhere. That's so wonderful. Um
I also want to add one more.
okay.
Play Nice by Rachel Harrison. I never get to
Yeah.
review Rachel. There are other people who want to review her, and I let them because I can't read everything. I mean, every book of hers gets better. Every book. This one, I feel like, and I'll be appearing with her, my first appearance, which will be after this comes out, but it's at Parnassus Books on September 18th with her and Alma to promote all of our books. But then I'll be appearing with Rachel again at New York Public Library with Grady and Victor and Clay on October 7th. But Rachel's book, I'm so excited to talk about it with her, with other people. I know you had an episode about it, but it is the haunted house book. I mean, is it haunted? Is it possessed? Is it, what is going on? But it is so smart and but it's also terrifying and it's also totally approachable. Like, I feel like she's the author that people are reading right now who don't think they like horror. And I'm like, oh no, my dudes, that is horror.
Yeah. Yeah, Rachel has that approachability to her fiction that is just so her voice is so uh it just feels like a friend telling you a story every time, even when she shifts characters and perspectives with each book. And I yeah, can't say enough great things about Rachel Harrison. Um so we're going to move over to our topic today. I'm excited about this because we're sort of building on when Gretchen Felker Martin was here, we did The Last Unicorn, which I wasn't sure how that was going to go, and it turned into a wonderful conversation. And Becky, when I approached Becky about this, Becky said, "Well, if we're really going to trace back to the origins of my love of horror and how horror works, we have to talk about Where the Sidewalk Ends by Shel Silverstein." So that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the legendary poetry collection that was in every school library unless someone complained about it, which happened. Uh, we're going to talk about Where the Sidewalk Ends and certain specific passages in it because I did not remember until I started rereading this before we did this conversation how dark it is. It's playfully dark, but it is absolutely a dark book.
Oh, it's very dark. And, a little bit of my origin for the origin, right? So I loved this book as a kid. I read it over and over and over again. Some of my greatest memories as a child in Flemington, New Jersey, was sitting in my bedroom. And this had to be, well, I moved when I was going into high school, but I think I was like 10 or 11, sitting there and spending like an entire rainy Saturday, not just with the book, but playing the cassette over and over, which only had a couple of the poems, and rewinding it and playing it again. Because let me tell you, Shel Silverstein had a creepy voice to go with the creepy poems. And I just loved it so much. And as I did the work that I talked about doing with other librarians throughout my career of looking at my like where my love of books is and what it is I love about the things I love to read. And one of the things I learned is I like to be unsettled, but especially in stories that are just slightly askew from the real world. And those were my favorite. And then back when I was a librarian at the Berwyn Public Library in Illinois, we would celebrate Children's Book Week every year. And one year, and every year when we'd celebrate it, they'd be like, please, staff, tell us your favorite book when you were a kid, and we'll do something with it. And then we had patrons participate. And one year, they actually did like paper chains through the whole library with everyone's titles. And so we started with staff, and then we spent the whole time, we spent a whole month actually getting patrons to participate of all ages. It's one of my favorite memories of the 15 years I worked there, just looking at those chains. And I remember going like, where's mine? And I'm reading other people's, and it's like, the Velveteen Rabbit and like Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing and, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, all these like super heartwarming. And I'm like, where the sidewalk ends. And I like sang to myself, like, one of these things is not like the other. and I think that was a moment for me to recognize that what I thought was everybody's favorite story, even though I knew that was mine. And so it really was on my journey of why for myself, a place that I investigated. And I'm using a copy that my husband gave me for Christmas in 2000 before I had children. They are now grown and out of the house, and has a little note on it how we're going to, we're going to love reading it. And I was talking to my kids about doing this podcast, and they're both, like I said, both out of the house. And my son was like, Mom, I love you, but when you gave me that book, it was too weird for me.
Well, it's really interesting when you take it as an entire piece, as an entire book, because I think for a lot of us, this book happened in fragments throughout childhood. A teacher would read one poem aloud, or I did in Texas. I'm sure there's versions of it in other states, but in Texas we have this thing called the University Interscholastic League, where it's kids basically competing with each other in academic competitions. And I did what was called oral reading, which was essentially performative poetry reading. And there would always be Shel Silverstein stuff popping up in that. So I heard things that way. But when you sit down, like the title alone evokes a certain sense, like we're going somewhere a little different. Like this is the part of the world where things are allowed to get strange, where the barriers that we know are going away.
Well, and let's talk about the cover. It says edge, keep off. There is a drawing of the sidewalk literally ending with two kids peering over it, with a dog hanging on for dear life. And there is a huge crack. This thing is going to break with those children on it.
Yes.
That's horror.
It is horror, and it's inviting you into this space where anything can happen, which is a key thing. Speaking of Josh Mallerman, he talks about that in his essay in your book. This idea that you are entrusting a storyteller to put you in a space where what happens next might be really funny, it might be really cool, or it might be very scary, or it might be all at once, those things. And these poems are that. and we could spend hours going through the whole book, but Becky was kind enough to send me a list of some specific things that she wanted to highlight. Um, one of the first one is Ickle Me, Pickle Me, Tickle Me 2, which is about three guys who go for a ride in a flying shoe. And go ahead, Becky.
Yeah, well, and this one is, that sort of dark fantasy, right? But also it was one of the ones on the tape. So I heard it over and over again. And the way he reads it is just, you get this sense of they're having fun. And then they're going too high. And then they're out in space. And then at the end, they never returned to the world they knew. And nobody knows what happened to Dear Ickle Me, Pickle Me, Tickle Me Too. I mean, it's this great adventure, but then they never come back.
Yeah. It's a very sort of there are a lot of haunting endings in this book. A lot of poems that I mean the sense of playfulness in this book is everywhere. There are poems that are 4 lines long where he's just, here's 4 lines. I don't know where else I was going with this, but it's fun. And then there are things like this where there's clearly a narrative intent to leave you with, again, endless possibilities, but also something possibly a little sinister happening, which takes us to It's Dark in Here, which is accompanied by one of my favorite illustrations where it's about a guy who is writing a poem from inside a lion. And you see the lion with a hand coming out of its mouth and someone scribbling on some pieces of paper. And it's like we were talking about, sort of buying the ticket and taking the ride and letting the storyteller take you a certain place. I think when I was a kid and I saw that, I was probably just like, oh, that's funny. That's like a cartoon, because the illustration is fun and fanciful. But now you think about this guy who's just like, this is probably it for me, but I feel like I probably need to say something about that. This might be my last will and testament because I'm inside a lion. And that's genuinely frightening. I think of all the times as a kid when someone would use a turn of phrase that I didn't understand, and it immediately would plunge me into horror because I didn't know what they were talking about. And just the image of it. Like, I've told this story on the podcast before, but rereading these poems reminded me of this story, which was we went on a field trip to a museum when I was a kid, and my mom was there. My mom was a chaperone for this field trip. And we get in the lobby, and the docents at the museum are there, and they're ready to take us around, and they're all happy to see us. And then one of them says, okay, so we're going to start. And she turned to her fellow docent and said, how do you want to do this? Do you want to cut them in half? Now, she meant cut the class in half, and half of us would go, because it was the museum was a big round. So it was like, we'll start at one group starts at this end, one group starts at this end, we meet in the middle. Cool. I, being 6 or 7 years old, was like, cut us in half? What are you about to do to me? And I had to sort of surreptitiously go over to my mom and go, they said they're going to cut us in half, Mom. What's about to happen? And she went, no, they mean dividing the group in half. And I knew my mom would not lie to me about this, but I was still sitting there going, but what's about to happen? And
Yeah.
that's what reading this kind of thing reminds me of.
And I think he plays off of that fact that he knows the audience he was writing for were children.
Yes.
So he can go to that line. So, like, it's dark in here. Yes, he draws that. And these poems are hard to divorce from their pictures many times. But he draws it. It is a hand coming out of a lion who looks pretty satiated. He's pretty happy. But then if you look a little bit all the way to the left, because it spans over 2 pages, there's a shoe that's off. And to me, as an adult, I'm like, that was a struggle. Like, that shows the sign of a struggle, but he just gives just enough to add that. So he's definitely knows his audience, and he's playing with it to know, I'm going to make you upset and unsettled. but you're going to feel safe because I'm here and it's on a book page and the drawing isn't too scary. Although we'll get to it. There are some that are more scary as we
Yeah.
go through the book. I just love it. I love it as that it's at the beginning. It's really, we could have talked about every poem, but It's Dark in Here is a great entry into what's coming next.
Yes. And one of the things that's coming next is a poem called Listen to the Mustn'ts, which is one of the shortest ones in the book. It's, let's see, 9 lines long, 8 lines long, something like that. But it's the main idea of it. He spends most of the poem telling you, listen to the mustn'ts, listen to the don'ts, listen to the shouldn'ts, the impossibles, the won'ts. And then at the end, he closes with, listen close to me. Anything can happen, child. Which is a fun, again, it's a fun, like, hey, people are going to tell you that stuff's impossible, but I'm here to tell you anything's possible. You can dream whatever you imagine. You can it can happen. Don't worry about it. Listen to me, and I'll tell you. But it also has this note of cosmic horror to it. Of
Yes. It's like, okay, look, everyone's going to tell you what you can't do. You're a kid. All right. There's a lot of bad things out there. There's a lot of things you can't do to be bad. There's a lot of bad things that are around you. But I'm telling you, you can do anything. And then yes, it is an intro to cosmic horror because there is anything out there. And so at first you're like, oh, I can do anything. I can listen to anything. I can be anything. But in the context of the whole book, anything, there's a lot of darkness.
well, this is exactly that feeling that I remember as a kid of when I went to my mom and said that they're going to cut us in half, and she went, no, they're not going to cut you in half. They're not. That is not going to happen. And at the same time, and every little instance of, there's not a monster in here. There's not there's not a person outside trying to get in the house. There's not. I remember being like, one of my earliest memories is being like 3 or 4 years old and hearing our toilet hiss, just because that was the sound it made when water flowed through it, and thinking there was a snake in the toilet, and my dad having to explain to me that's not a thing that's going to happen. And this poem is sort of giving you permission to dream up anything you want to dream up, but it's also giving you permission to look up at the sky and go, what if there's a monster up there just waiting to come down and get me?
It's all there. And like you said, in those couple lines. And again, taken out of context, I don't know if we'd get that same feeling. You could present this poem as, this is like a positive, you can do it, right? Like anything. But within the context of the entire book, it adds a layer of sinisterness that it just builds off of it. And when you think about it, it's heavy on you as a kid thinking about it all.
So then we're talking about a poem called True Story, which, hey, speaking of weird westerns,
Yeah.
it's kind of a weird western. It's about a guy goes out for a ride and has
An adventure.
an insane adventure. He fights outlaws, he meets pirates, there's a mermaid, there's all of these
Yay,
things.
Eagles. And then the last line is, you'll never guess what I did then. I died.
Yeah, twist ending. This great adventure ends with the dude just conking out. That's it.
I mean, it's just like, wait, what? What did you just tell me? That one I read over and over again. And I don't know why, but so much horror is about death and dying and what happens to you after you die and how you come to terms with it and why bad things happening to good people. So much of it's about that. And this one is just, okay, you did what? Like the cardinal sin of middle grade literature, which we learn about in library school, is like, you don't kill the protagonist, right? Their parents can be dead because that always happens, right? My parents died, but the kid doesn't die. And yet, here we go.
yes. Well, speaking of, like, we talked about the guy writing the poem from Inside the Lion, that you also mentioned Boa Constrictor, which is the very next poem, which genuinely upset me, a 39-year-old man reading this last night, because it is literally just a guy narrating what is happening as a boa constrictor consumes him. bit by bit. Just, oh, it's up to my waist, it's up to my neck, and then it literally ends with a man's voice being choked out because the boa constrictor has now swallowed his head and he can't talk anymore.
And they're back to back. And I love, like, we were talking when we were playing this, like, how the book is constructed matters. And having these two back to back, you can't miss what he did in the first one. He's like, okay, so I just killed the guy and it's a drawing of the kid, right? In the true story on a horse. And now I'm going to take you to the next one. In case you didn't get my meaning, here we go.
Yeah, it's it's such a it's such a bold thing, and like I remember for years, sort of, obviously, especially now in 2025, we talk about banned books and we talk about all of the ludicrous reasons that people will choose to object to a book. And you hear about this book being challenged and people being concerned about it, and I was going like, why would anyone ever like be concerned about Shel Silverstein? That's what is that? Now I know. I
Here's
remember
what,
now.
and yes, I'm sure, and I know there are people that try to ban these, but here's the thing, right? These are emotions that kids are feeling. And as a
Yes.
very anxious, unsettled kid who, I had serious anxiety as a kid, and some of it was health related with unresolved health issues. Actually, that's a funny story because I had a fractured skull as a kid, and Clay's story or Clay's essay in my book is about the three times. It isn't about a lot of things, but he fractured his skull three times. And that is a fun thing to learn about Clay that we share in common. I was only once. Anyway, when that happened, I had a lot of medical anxiety around figuring out what was wrong with me. And my anxiety was very high as a kid. And I felt like sometimes going into these poems was the only place where I found some other similar feelings and somebody who legitimized maybe not my exact anxieties. I was not afraid of being eaten by a boa constrictor. I lived in suburban New Jersey. We did not have boa constrictors, but I understood the feelings here. And I feel like I should thank him every day for being that space. And the people who want to ban books that have any kind of big ideas or ideas that are outside the mainstream for kids are just wrong, because these kids are having all these feelings, and kids know all these different types of people and want to hear stories about people in the world and have their questions answered. And thank goodness he was there to do that for me.
It is something that, as a parent now, my son is 2, so we're not into the horror space yet, but I remember, and I've talked about this a lot on the show. Horror was not a thing I was allowed as a kid, but I remember the dark thoughts. I have very vivid memories of thinking about things like death and sort of wanting some sort of outlet where I could sort of safely look at them. Um, and that was true of things like Disney movies where the characters would die and it would be a thing, but it was also in books, and the idea that you could look at something like Shel Silverstein, which is intended for children, and there would be these dark moments combined with that sort of classic Shel Silverstein warmth of saying to you like, "Hey, we're going to talk about this. It's going to be kind of dark and kind of weird, but it's okay. We're all having a good time. Let's move on to the next thing." My grandmother used to tell a story that when I was maybe 5 years old, I said, I told her, I guess I was mad at my parents, and I told her, "You're the only one who listens to me, and I'm so sad." And she said, "Why are you sad, Matthew?" And I said, "Because one day you're going to die, and then no one's going to listen to me." And of course, she was like, "I'm not going to die for a long time. It's fine. Don't worry." But it was, kids are thinking these things. These are things that naturally occur in young minds. And in a way that is, not unhealthy, not like so it's important that these things come up, which I guess brings us to the next one, which is kind of my favorite, which is
Just think about that. That was a great transition.
Enter This Deserted House, which is basically The Shining, in six couplets, five couplets. No, six couplets. That's right. Yeah. It's uh someone telling someone to enter a deserted house and be careful and don't mess anything up and then that
And there are monsters that live here, so just get over it,
there are monsters that live here and oh hey by the way
But
I live here and so do you.
I
it's
love
it's you've always been the caretaker but for kids and as
it's my
someone
first haunted house story.
it
It's like the
is
origin of me learning about a haunted house, and it's called a deserted house, but that picture looks like a haunted house.
it is a classic Halloween cutout haunted house picture. And as someone who I grew up in rural central Texas where there were deserted houses, including a couple that were on my family's property that I could go in and mess around in. I remember having those sort of fantasies about like what goes on in here when no one is. I used to have the thought, and this is a thought I still have, but now I'm an adult, so there's no excuse. But the thought of like what happens in a grave what when because you bury someone and they're down in the ground and we know that that's a dead person but like what happens down there just when that person is laying there forever and ever what happens does anything interesting happen or is it just boring and deserted houses have that same thing of yeah it's probably just an old house it's probably just drywall and boards and a roof that's leaking and nothing else is happening. But what if it was my house the whole time and I just didn't know it?
And the other thing about this is too is that it brings in this, takes that house that kids have seen and thought about, but also has things like there are flowers here, there are daisies, there are birds and sunbeams, but also gnomes and goblins and and owning it, making it personal, and just capturing that feeling, all those feelings of the awe and the wonder, but also the fear, like everything horror brings is in this one little poem.
It is. And we're that takes us to a completely different sort of tone shift.
Yeah, we skipped a bunch of pages.
We did. It's further down in the book. But it's a poem called Sarah Cynthia Sylvia Stout Would Not Take the Garbage Out, and it's basically about a hoarder who is crushed to death by all the garbage that she won't take out. And I can you can see this is one of those that's really fun because you can see the lesson that it's imparting, the idea of like hey, if your parents tell you to take the garbage out, you should take the garbage out. That's a good idea because if no one takes the garbage out, then the garbage just piles up, and that's not nice. But it's told in this way. It's very rolled.
It is visceral. It is every little thing that's on that garbage, soggy beans and tangerines, crusts of blackburn butter toast, right? There's like moldy melons, eggshells mixed with lemon custard. Like it is visceral. You are like, it's when I talk about horror, I talk about how the best authors are able to employ all five senses on the page so that you can feel, smell, see, touch, hear the story. This is the perfect example of that. And you even hear it like crushing her in a way, in the story.
He also does an amazing thing to wrap this one up, which is to essentially say, yeah, a bad thing happened to her, but I'm not going to tell you exactly what it was because it's getting late and I probably shouldn't say it. Which is just
it leaves it open-ended.
Yes, it's a classic like kid ghost story technique. Like when you're telling a kid a story and you get to a part where it's scary and just I shouldn't tell you this. This is way too scary.
The blanks yourself at the level you're most comfortable.
Yeah,
this is gross. This story is gross.
It is.
Like the garbage is just there, and he tells you yellow lumps of cream of wheat. I can't even with grisly bits of beefy roast. Like it's just, I love it. I love how it does it. It might not be blood and guts, but it's that same idea.
Yes. And then there is, let's see, what's the next one?
I
Oh,
think it's
magical eraser is what you put.
because this is the villain, right? The villain is the
Yeah.
protagonist.
Yeah, it's absolutely it's about someone who realized who's confronting a yeah, we could say a bully because they're not nice to the
Yeah,
protagonist, but
yeah.
the protagonist is like, I have a pencil with a magical eraser, and this other kid goes, no, you don't. You're dumb. You don't have a magical. You're a silly moo, is what he
Yeah.
says that they're called. And so they use the magical eraser to erase this person. And I the illustrations in Shel Silverstein are generally, I think, pretty playful. This image of this mostly erased young person in here is so upsetting.
I mean, it is that feeling that kids have if they're bullied to
Yeah.
erase the person bullying them or to do something horrible to them that hopefully the kids aren't going to do. But also, like, this is your hero. The hero of this poem, the protagonist, this little boy is attacking, is talking to this girl and that girl bully, and he's taken a full villain turn. And it's
He
done.
has.
I erase her! Exclamation point. Done. I erase
Yes.
her.
It's such a it's such an interesting, especially now, I think, when
Mhm.
we have so many conversations, we have to beat this those of us who work in genre spaces have to beat this drum constantly of like, yeah, the people do bad things in these stories. That's what makes them horror stories. And I love that in this book, this ubiquitous children's book of poems that is everywhere, he wrote a poem about someone taking a villain turn and doing something nasty, and does not apologize for it, does not offer any caveat of like, yeah, but she was terrible, she was an awful person and probably deserved it. It's just, no, I have a gut reaction to someone insulting me, I'm going to do this now. And there's not a bit where it's like, oh, I can draw her back, it's fine. No, it's, I
And not even like,
erased
I'm
her.
sorry I did it.
No,
Yeah.
I love it. I love
I-
how far it goes.
and
Uh,
it's terrifying when you actually think about it. Like, I'm sure when I read it as a kid, I was like, yay. But then I do remember that one. Like, I remember it being like, ooh, but that's not good.
yeah, it's, and then we have two monster stories, the Bloth and the Yippee Yuck, which are right next to each other in this 2-page spread. Which I love. The Bloth, the description of the Bloth, which you barely get to see. It's just a pair of eyes looking out from high grass, but there dwells a Bloth who feeds upon poets and tea.
And
Luckily,
he's
I know.
writing this as a poet, right? Luckily,
Yes,
I know this about him while he knows nothing of me. Like, this monster's out to get me, your author, right? This is like a breaking the fourth wall. He does that a lot in these poems,
he
but this one
does.
is breaking the fourth wall as Shel Silverstein. Like, look, I got to watch out. I'm telling you about him, but we're going to stop because he's going to go after me. And yeah, it's creepy and it's what every kid thinks about, right? There's something hiding in that dark space.
Yes, and you can see it in every, like, I grew up in the country. There were lots of patches of high grass, and you'd hear rustling, and you were not sure what was in there, and you just learned to keep walking. Uh, and then the Yippee Yuck is, there's this sort of disheveled looking man who explains that this creature called a Yippee Yuck bit him on his toe, and it refused. It reminds me of the Burr Woman, the story that I talked with Nat Cassidy about when he was here. Because it's just about a monster who grabs onto you and doesn't ever release. And this is me like having my own baggage attached now, but I'm looking at this guy and he doesn't have shoes because he can't put on a shoe because the thing is on
Nope.
his toe. He's wearing he's got a cigar hanging out of his mouth. He's got a huge scruffy beard. His clothes look like they don't really fit. He looks a little unhoused, a little bit
Yeah.
like a drifter. And I almost am. This is just where my brain goes because I'm a recovering alcoholic, but I'm like, this is a metaphor for addiction. This
Well, and
is
I think of it as a metaphor for disability as well.
that too.
And as
Yes.
an adult, and that's interesting. I think he was doing that for the adults, or and to build empathy in kids for people, because at the end it says, this is why I walk so slow, right? Exactly why I walk so slow. And yes, he looks disheveled. He does look like he's unhoused. Um, but he has a story to why he got to where he is. And,
Yes.
and working at the public library for so many years, I I love this about my job. Anybody and everybody can come to the public library, but many people who are coming in are bringing baggage with them that I will never know. And the library is their safe space. And some of it's serious and some of it's not. But we train our staff and we do this. We accept everyone for who they are and what they bring. And we are there to help them as long as they follow our rules. And like at my library, just being respectful, as long as you're respectful, is our only rule. We don't care if you sleep. We don't care, if you're unhoused. We don't care about that. And this is a person looking back on it now as an adult. Like, there are people every day, and I teach my staff this when they get frustrated. Like, everybody is coming here with something you don't know that is heavy on them. And you need to understand that when you deal with people and give them grace. And I feel like this is the poem. Yes, it's about a monster, but it's a metaphor for, like you said, addiction or disability or whatever thing is making you unable to conform to what is normal in the
I
world.
I think that every person has the memory as a kid of like the first time you saw someone who was missing a limb, or the first time you saw someone wearing an eye patch, or the first time you saw someone uh who just looked sickly, like the first time you saw a woman who didn't have hair and your brain went, what is that? I don't understand. And it is so important to as we mature and get older, we get used to that thing and go, well, everyone looks different from everybody else, and that's fine. That's the way the world works. But yeah, this poem about a guy who's like, I got this thing on my toe and I can't walk right. It's such a simple and fun way to engage that part of your brain and realize like, oh, some people just walk slower. Um,
Or some people have things that you know nothing about, and they could be pretty scary,
yeah,
but they also deal with that every day.
yes. So we're moving from that to cannibalism, everybody.
There are multiple cannibalism stories.
There's more
Um,
than one. Yeah,
and we don't have to do both, but this one is like the most clear. Me stew.
me
It's
too.
it's a guy in a with a chef's hat in a pot. I have nothing to put in my stew, you see, not a bone or a bean or a black eyed pea. So I'll just climb into the pot to see. And he's literally cooking himself.
And he
Um,
he ends it by saying, "I hope you all enjoy me with crackers." It is. It is. We talked about this when Clay McLeod Chapman was here a few weeks ago. The Stephen King story Survivor type. It's
yep.
basically that, but he puts himself in a pot instead of cutting off parts of him, which is again very playful and fanciful and fun, because when you're a little kid is sitting in a classroom, you're not thinking about eating yourself, but the more you go back to it, the more you start going, oh dang man. And then there's another one called, what was the other one that you
Oh, it's toward the
uh,
end. It's called Hungry Mungry. And it's literally
yeah.
the story of a guy that was so hungry, he ate everything. And literally he ate the world. He ate Chicago, he eats the Egyptian pyramids. It goes through. And then he starts just eating himself because there was nothing left to eat.
And then this is amazing because we talked about this a little bit before. This is a jump scare poem called that's just called The Worst. And it's again one of the very shortest ones. It's 7 lines, and it's Shel Silverstein explaining to his readers what the worst monster is.
And
And
there's a drawing on the other side, and it
yes,
is scary.
yes, there's a drawing of this troll-like being with big fangs coming up, and crooked eyes and lots of hair jutting out from its body. And he's just saying, I feel obligated at this moment to remind you of the most ferocious beast of all, 3,000 pounds and 9 feet tall, the glurpy, slurpy skagcarol. Skakagrol. That's how it's pronounced. And then at the very end, he just says, "Who's standing right behind you?"
I mean, jump scare.
Jump
And you
scare.
see it, but like, and here's the thing I want to point out with all of these, and I think you since you just read a few lines, all of these poems we're talking about, every single one, no matter how scary or unsettling, they rhyme.
They
Like
rhyme.
like so these are not open, free verse. Everything's in rhyming couplets. Makes it even more terrifying because even when you were reading it, I was like, oh yeah, look, it's all sing-songy. But this thing is scary and it's coming to get you.
Yes, I had never thought of it in terms of like a kid's first jump scare. I don't know what my first jump scare actually was because I don't have a strong memory of reading this particular poem, but it absolutely. Oh no, I know what my first jump scare was. It was when our PE teacher told us the her version of the Golden Arm ghost story, the guy who
Oh
gets
yeah.
buried and comes
Mhm.
back. And she did the thing that Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark does, where it tells you at the end, like, jump towards your audience and yell. And she did that, and that was my first proper jump scare. But this is, yeah, it's right here in this little short poem. Just unexpected, waiting there on page 130 to freak you out. Um,
Yeah, as if you weren't freaked out enough yet in the book. He's like, I feel like this poem, because it's almost at the end, it's definitely well into the last third. And I feel like now looking back, it's like, okay, reminder, these poems are scary.
they are, they are. And then we have one more that I know that you wanted to. Which one is it? The one who
The
stayed.
one who stayed. So, one of the things in horror I know now is this idea of fairy tales are terrifying, right? That the Grimm's fairy tales were not for the faint of heart. Now Disney has, done a lot of work to make them more sanitized, and we talk about this a lot more now. Um, but I think kids always knew fairy tales were scary, and then we all of us read some of the originals, but even the Disney versions are slightly terrifying. This is a poem about the kid who didn't go with the Pied Piper. And what Pied Piper is a scary story for children anyway. It's a cautionary tale, right? Don't go with strangers and all this. But this guy's dad told him, don't go, right? All my friends left. Everybody's gone. But they never came back. And they followed this guy, and he seemed like he was a great guy. But now I'm left, and everybody here is old. I'm the only kid. I maybe I should have followed, but I didn't go because I was scared. And so this idea of being scared, first of all, being scared is, look, it's okay. I was scared. This is Shel Silverstein telling you. But also, being scared can lead to bad things, right? Because yes, you didn't go off and die with the Pied Piper, but also you didn't leave home. You didn't try anything. And things are scary out there, and maybe try something.
What struck me, and this is pure recency bias, but reading this last night, I went, "Oh, this is Weapons. This is like a good portion of the plot of Weapons. Is this exact thing, and what happens to you when you're the kid that is stuck, not just with being left, but what with the knowledge of being left, and with all the adults looking at you expectantly, like, why were you the one who stayed behind?" And I'm not going to say anything more about that because I don't want to
I think
spoil
that's a good
Weapons.
idea. Yeah. But
It,
here's the thing. Let's take it the other way. Did the people who did Weapons read Shel Silverstein?
I bet they did. I
I
bet Zach Kreger is the right age to have read Where the Sidewalk Ends, and I do wonder about that. And I almost said, "Hey Zach, if you're listening, please come on this podcast and talk to me about your influences, and we can talk about Shel Silverstein." But now that's sort of the end of the list of recommended poems that you sent me, so I want to dig in a little more as we're nearing the end here on when did you start to realize, like, first of all, when did you transition from stuff like this into reading stuff that was absolutely shelved as horror?
I think it's more of a gradual thing. So in my house, I was allowed to read whatever I wanted, and there were no rules. And then this is very common, I would say, in New York Jewish families. I can't speak to others, but, and I've talked about this on other podcasts. In my family, we also talked about very dark things all the time because I'm only alive because Hitler existed, right? My grandmother fled the Holocaust, and I was very close with my grandmother. She lived in New York City. We lived very close. I now have Holocaust refugee reparations citizenship to the country of Austria, which if there were no Hitler, she would have never left and I wouldn't be born. And this is something that families like mine grappled with and talked about. So death and horror and horrible things were discussed openly in my house, which I came to realize as I got older was not common. But when you grow up in these worlds and it's just done, it's very common. So I was allowed to read anything I wanted. My dad liked Stephen King and he was always reading Stephen King. I remember the year the Unabridged The Stand came out, that was his beach read for the whole summer. We had a vacation house in the Poconos and it was very like 1980s traditional, like we went for the whole summer. My dad came for the weekends. And so he would be reading that on the weekends. And so I had Stephen King around, but I didn't really like Stephen King as like a young girl in the 80s. I'm 50 now. So I was right at that height of like that, Stephen King craze because it was all about boys. And I'm like, I'm a girl. Like I might be a top boy, but I'm still a girl. And like, this is not of interest to me. But I did find the occult section at B. Dalton's because I'm a Jersey girl forever and go to the mall. Shout out to the Flemington Mall, which no longer is a mall. It's now box stores, but I was there. And at B. Dalton, I found the occult section. And again, my family, I mean, they left me at the library on weekends and said, we'll get you in 4 hours to not supervise. Let me bring home whatever. But at the bookstore, when we were at the mall, we would go to the bookstore and my dad would be looking for things and we would not always buy things. But once in a while, he'd be like, you can get a paperback book. And I was less than 13. I was 12 or under because we only lived, it was around the time of my bat mitzvah and we moved soon after that. So I know how old I was. Okay. I was not of the right age, but Flowers in the Attic was the book I took home. And let me tell you, that book, I took it home because of the cover and I read it again and I read it again. And then I got more. And I think that brought me back to that occult section. And so I tried a lot more of those stories. But what happened as I got older, I found myself drawn to more what we call psychological suspense. So those dark stories that are not necessarily supernatural or, and he wasn't writing then yet, but the Paul Tremblay vein of, is it supernatural or is it real? And it's up to you to figure it out.
Yeah.
I was drawn to a lot of that type of story. So all the stories I looked for were slightly askew and off and dark and speculative. But I would say horror proper, I really didn't get into as the only thing I'm reading until sort of the tail end of the leisure books era, before they collapsed. And so like Richard Lehman and Brian Keene and those stories, the early Sarah Pineborough, oh my gosh, they're re-releasing some of her early horror books. Those things were freaking scary. So those things really caught my eye. They were in paperback. They were easy for me to get and read. And so then I just sort of went all in. And the one book that I would say got me to be like, this is it. This is all I'm doing, is Scott Smith's The Ruins. It is a perfect book. Do not watch the movie. The movie is terrible. I know you love movies, Matthew, but the movie is awful. I read that book, that came out in like 2000. That's the book that tipped me over to be like, I got to only read this because it's a near perfect book. And spoiler alert, nobody lives. It's 25 years old. I don't mind spoiling it.
Oh no. Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, I'm this is very funny because we're talking a lot about libraries, and my love of horror started in a library as well, but not in a way that I think my parents knew about. Because this was the thing: is when I was we had a tiny school library. I went to a very rural elementary school, not a lot of kids, and our school library was very small. But we had library time every week. You would go in and sit in the library for an hour or whatever and pick out your books and then go. So no one in that room cared what I was reading in that hour. And what I found, uh, I still have not read a Goosebumps novel to completion because I wasn't allowed to read them, and I would grab them from time to time and read a chapter and go, "Ooh, that's spooky," and then but I couldn't take it home, so I would never be able to finish it. But my school library, because I'm sure it was under budgeted and they were just keeping books around as long as they unless the book fell apart, they were keeping it. They had the Crestwood House Publishing monster books, which Crestwood, they're collector's items now, and it's like a dream of mine to get a full set of them. They were picture books uh, that would basically summarize the plots of the Universal Monsters movies. And it was all just black and white production stills from these movies and then like plot summaries. And the plot summaries were written to be like little horror stories. They were written, excuse me, with suspense in mind and with horror in mind to try to frighten you. And I found those because they were in like the arts and entertainment section, which I say section, it was probably like two shelves, but I found those and would just sit there and obsessively read the Frankenstein one and the Dracula one and just go like, "Oh man, what would this be like to watch this, to see this on the screen? Oh my gosh, this is so scary." And when I was a teenager, I finally watched those movies and they weren't nearly as scary as my experience reading those books when I was, you know, 7, 8, 10 years old. And it was always like if I had written an essay for your book, it probably would have been about those books because they were so important in getting me used to this kind of thing. And the rest of it is entirely just because my dad told me not to, which I
I
think
love
is
it.
in perfect outsider spirit of how horror works to just be like, oh yeah, I can't read Stephen King. Well, I'm gonna read Stephen King. I'm gonna do it
I,
now. Watch.
I love it. And I always feel like sad that like my family was like, yeah, I love Stephen King. You know, another thing that I was obsessed with when I was a kid, which I now talk to people about, that it is a horror origin, is Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
I was obsessed with Scooby Doo. It was one of the cartoons I never missed. If I missed it, I got upset. You know, I know they were reruns, but like, after school, we only had a couple channels. And although I was lucky, I lived halfway between New York and Philly, so we turned the antenna and I got a whole nother set of channels. But Scooby Doo is, I going back and thinking, I literally would physically be upset if I missed it. And every story was what I was talking about, that transition I was making to like, is it supernatural or is it real? And, even though they always uncovered there was a real reason, I still kind of thought I liked the monster version better.
Yeah. Um, so as we're getting to the end here, like we talked about this before, the importance of the question of why. And I am, and this I'm sure is because I have a 2-year-old son, and I want him to have a healthy relationship with horror, whether he likes it or not. If he doesn't like it, that's fine. If he does like it, I want him to feel like, okay, this is a safe space for you to understand what this thing is that daddy's really into. Um, I think it's important, and Josh's essay gets into this, other essays get into this, to acknowledge if it wasn't clear enough already from us talking about Scooby Doo and Shel Silverstein. One of the whys is that this is fun. And I know that you write a lot of horror reviews. I write a lot of horror reviews. We write a lot about the metaphors and the darkness and the themes that go deep into trauma. And we were talking about the Buffalo Hunter is like the original sin of America laid bare in novel form. it's very heavy, but it's also just fun. And
Oh,
I
what he
think,
does in that is, yeah, it. But here's a great example. I was just looking back to, I do a giveaway to library workers on my blog. And the week we're recording this, I gave away a copy of um, Breathe In, Bleed Out by Brian McCauley. And in my review in Booklist Magazine, I'm like, these are, and I said it more eloquently, and I have a very tight word limit, so I'm very careful. But basically, also, the kills are super fun and over the top. Like, and that's great. Like, it is so much fun to read about this Scream-esque story. It's very much like Scream the movie, and it's at a wellness retreat, you know, and they're off in the middle of nowhere. There's no phone service. It's supposed to be scary, yes. It's supposed to be thought-provoking, yes, because it's a lot about the whole health influencer thing, but it's also fun.
I love emphasizing that because when Rachel Harrison was here a couple of weeks ago, because we talked a lot, there's a lot of trauma metaphors in her books, and there's a lot of, So Thirsty was entirely a book about a woman realizing that her life was going nowhere and wanting to find some new way to live, but it's also fun. And I think that that is so important to drive home, especially when we're talking about books for young people, because it is a safe space, and several of your authors wrote about this too. It is a safe space to experience these feelings.
And, you know, if nothing else, Stephen Graham Jones always talks about this. I can't remember if it's in his essay or not, but we've done a lot of appearances together. And I always bring this up because he talks about it so eloquently. The line between being afraid and laughing is so fine. And you see that when you have a jump scare and then you giggle, right? But
Yes.
it's very comedy and horror are right next to each other. And one word or one switch of emphasis or one change of a comma makes one the other. And I think that's important to remember. People who don't like being scared don't like horror, but you have to understand, you might not like it, but there's something fun for the people who do. And, you know, don't yuck my yum. I'm having fun.
Yes, exactly. Uh, and we could talk for hours about the empathy thing, but I just like, and that is absolutely, that's one of the reasons that I think that horror people are some of the nicest people. Like I just mentioned Eric LaRocca. I spent a couple of hours with Eric today. You're spending time with Eric as we record this uh, uh
Tomorrow. Yeah.
tomorrow. And Eric is one of the kindest, gentlest souls I have ever encountered in my life, and he wrote We Are Always Tender with Our Dead, which might be the most brutal, bleak book published by a Big Five publisher this year. Uh, and it's anyway. We could go on and on and on
No,
about
it's
this, but
absolutely true. And I love that dichotomy. And when I interview him and moderate the conversation for his book on the day after we record this, um, we are going to talk about that. We're going to talk about
yes,
that because I think people who aren't horror people have trouble reconciling this. And so bringing it back to my book, that's the whole thing I'm trying to do with my book, you know, is reconcile this for the people who don't understand, but also provide a love letter to those who do, so that they can have an argument to tell those people who say, well, how can you like that stuff? Or I can't believe you're into that. Or the one I get is, you don't look like a horror person. I'm like, well, guess what? Horror people are everyone. So I'm glad that I don't look like a horror person.
my mom doesn't look like a horror person either, but I send her every book that I read to read herself, and she loves it. I've sent her the most depraved stuff on my shelves, and she's still like, "Yeah, that was great. That was really fun. You got more? Let's go." Um,
Look, I always say this about it. If dark stories and that lure of just the illicit wasn't a big deal, Law and Order Special Victims wouldn't still be on TV.
there you go. I always
Mic drop.
find that so funny when someone doesn't like horror, but they watch every true crime thing that's ever released, and I'm like, you kind of do like horror, though. Have you ever considered that maybe if I handed you something like Josh Chaplinsky's Letters to the Purple Satin Killer, that you might be more into this stuff than you think you are? Anyway, the book is Why I Love Horror. It is in stores September 23rd, which means that when this goes up, it will be out. You should go get it. You should also keep track of everything that Becky is doing in the reviewing space and the reader's advisory space. Becky, if people want to do all of that, where can they find you online?
The easiest place to go is RA for All, the blog. It's raforall.blogspot.com. At the top of the page, I have the link to my appearance schedule. There's a link to the horror blog. In October, I go bananas and I do 31 Days of Horror, where I focus on why I love horror essays. I have essays from Nat Cassidy, Lyndsay Ryan, Andy Davidson, a whole bunch of people from Creature Publications coming on, and a couple other people that I'm still waiting on. So there's going to be a lot going on. I'm also on Blue Sky, and you can just find me there or at a library near you, right? I'm constantly training your libraries, and my reviews are in Booklist and Library Journal.
Becky, we are grateful for everything you do in the horror space, and I am personally grateful to you for coming on this show. It's been so great getting to know you and chat with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I can't wait to get to see you in person at SnowCon.
Absolutely, let's do it. Thanks once again to Becky Spratford for being on the show. It was a blast talking to her. Why I Love Horror is available right now wherever books are sold. You should pick it up. It's got wonderful stuff in it. I also highly recommend it as a gift to the budding horror fan in your life. They will learn a lot of cool stuff from a lot of cool people. And as we discussed in the interview, Becky also managed to pack this thing with reading recommendations. So any of these authors that you haven't read who have an essay in this book, you're going to find a starting point for their fiction in there. It's amazing. Becky's great. Go buy her book. Also, be sure to find her on social media and follow everything she does. She reviews horror books. She recommends horror books. She talks to horror authors. If you love horror literature, you got to keep track of everything Becky's got going on. And if you want to keep track of everything we have going on, the easiest way to do that is to follow us on Blue Sky. We are at scareshapedus.bsky.social. That is where you will find every new episode of the show, new guest announcements, giveaways, everything else we have going on. You can also go find us on Facebook. We're The Scares That Shaped Us over there. We are also The Scares That Shaped Us on YouTube. If that is how you prefer to listen to your podcasts, head over there, like, subscribe. We appreciate the support. We also have a newsletter. It is a hybrid newsletter containing both The Scares That Shaped Us stuff and all of my horror and horror adjacent writing work around the web and stuff that's original to the newsletter. You can get all of that by going to Matthew Jackson Writes. That's Writes as in writer, WRITES, MatthewJacksonWrites.com. Sign up. There are paid tiers where you can chip in as little as $1 a month to help us out. But if you do not want to spend the money or you're not able to, totally understand. We would still really appreciate an email sign up. You're going to get some cool stuff. I've got something amazing coming for October that I'm not ready to tell you about yet, but I will tell you about next week. So go sign up for the newsletter. Cool things are coming for the Halloween season. And of course, if you like the show, please tell your friends. Go to the podcasting app of your choice. Leave us a 5-star review. Share links on socials. If you know someone whose favorite author has been on the show, point them to that episode. Hopefully they'll catch on and want to keep following us. I will do this show forever if y'all let me. So if you enjoy what we're doing, please let people know about it so we can keep doing it on a bigger and bigger and bigger scale. We will be back next week with a brand new episode. Our guest will be Neil McRobert, the creator and host of Talking Scared and the author of his debut novella, Good Boy, which comes out next month. We're going to talk to Neil about writing his first novella, and we're going to dig into one of the greatest horror films of all time, certainly one of the greatest horror films of the 1980s, an absolute classic, 1984's A Nightmare on Elm Street, written and directed by Wes Craven. Neil has some very insightful thoughts about it, and we had a great conversation. I hope you tune in for it. That will come out October 1st at noon Central. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. I'm Matthew Jackson, and this is The Scares That Shaped Us.